Good evening and welcome to all our guests tonight. This is Yvonne Brannon from Public Schools First NC. I am chair of the board for Public Schools First NC. I am currently a social science researcher, but my previous career was as a social worker. I'm joined tonight by Dr. Terrence Ruth. Terrence, tell everyone a little bit about yourself.
How you doing, everyone? I'm Terrence Ruth, professor at NC State, consultant with Public Schools First NC, and also a father of a kid who just entered kindergarten. So much of this discussion is very relevant to my life currently.
Very good. And we're going to jump right into talking about our topic tonight. And we really appreciate everybody being here. At the end of our workshop tonight, two things will happen. One, you'll get an email documenting that you've had 2 hours of contact with us for this workshop if you need to use that for any purposes. And the other thing is that we will be recording this, and we hope to put it on our YouTube channel, and we hope that you will share it with your colleagues and friends who were not able to come. So this is a workshop fostering trauma-informed classroom schools and communities that Terrence and I have been doing for the last couple of years, and we usually do it in person. And it's going to be interesting to see how we can do it tonight. It won't have the same interactive feel that we do when we have an audience that can stop us and nod, and we can, you know, see whether if people are following along or need a break or need a conversation. So bear with us. We're going to do the best we can to do a good job. And we will be offering these workshops and the film Resilience again in the fall, we hope. And if they are available for public attendance, you'll be able to see that on our Facebook page under events. But for now, the whole conversation that we're talking about tonight started when around the concept of adverse childhood experiences. And I just want to do a quick review tonight about kind of our reference for that we use for all of the work that we're talking about tonight. And that is around adverse childhood experiences. Adverse childhood experiences have been well documented in a study that was done some time ago by Kaiser Permanente. And these experiences produce toxic stress. And then, you know, the focus of what we're trying to do is understanding adverse childhood experiences, understanding the stress that comes from these experiences, and how we can understand and build resilience in children, but through our trauma-informed practices. So Terrence and I have been doing workshops for parents, for PTAs, and being trauma-informed. And tonight we're going to focus a little bit on classroom and school experiences. But as I said, let me just take a few seconds to go over adverse childhood experiences that were identified in this study. Emotional or physical neglect, emotional or physical or sexual abuse, incarceration of a parent, racism, bullying, domestic violence, mental illness in a family. These are all things that have been related to adverse childhood experiences. And I added on this slide that we've been using for years, COVID-19, because I think we all understand that the impact of what that's going on with our kids in our community right now. And we'll talk about that a little bit in a few seconds. But the whole concept of these adverse childhood experiences, and then I wanted to go over again the concept of toxic stress. So we're talking about toxic stress as a dangerous biological syndrome that's caused by abuse and neglect. We're talking about stress to the degree and the consistency that it triggers hormones that create havoc on the brains and the bodies of our children. It impacts the child's ability to learn. And we know that it's associated with everything from misbehavior at school to heart disease. It can shorten life expectancies of those who suffer it. And this has been phenomenal kind of research and understanding that we're all starting to have now is what the long-term consequences of toxic stress are. We see it in many ways throughout our society. And then the third concept around all the work we've been doing about adverse childhood experiences, the toxic stress that comes from this, is also the concept of hope behind understanding all of this, that we can teach and model resilience and help children thrive and adapt and cope even during tough and stressful times. Resilience is the natural counterweight to ACEs. You know, I always like to say, you know, resilience trumps ACEs. The more resilient children are, the more likely they are able to deal with the negative situations. And as you know, if you saw the film, and I hope you did, and if you didn't, I hope that you will work with us to figure out how we can offer it at your school. Resilience is something that is not necessarily you're born with, but it's something that can be taught and can be learned. And we feel very strongly, and that's why we're investing a lot of our personal time in talking about adverse childhood experience and resiliency, because we think that adults, especially in a school setting, can buffer toxic effects of toxic stress, can be the buffer of that. Schools can create a trauma-informed climate to help students be academically successful. Teachers can do this in their classrooms, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that. But I want to step back for just a moment and talk a little bit about the COVID-19, because not thinking about it in terms of the stress and resilience and how to respond to this would be hard to do tonight. So we just want to take a few minutes to talk a little bit about how this is related to child development and well-being. The same thing is going on right now. We have the threat of a virus. We don't have enough testing. We don't have a vaccine. So the stress is running really high in families right now. And sources for relief around some of these stressors are closed. Schools are closed, places of worship are closed, workplaces are closed. Children are isolated at home more now. And some of the systems that they count on outside of the home for relief just are simply not there. So we all know this, but I think it's worth repeating and putting in our minds tonight as we talk about these things. Now, how do we support families? And we're, you know, through crisis and beyond, through this crisis, we have learned, if we've learned anything in this process we've been through in the last month and a half, it is that we have to deal with the issues around poverty and racism and violence. We have to deal with these issues around helping our families who are struggling with housing and food insecurity, limited medical care, and social isolation. These are the very strong issues that have been creating stress and adverse childhood experiences in our families. And we've learned in the crisis how critical they are to well-being of the children. So one of the things that you are doing, I'm sure now as educators, and you'll be doing more in the fall, is helping your families connect with hotlines, with food banks, with relief funds. This is what a lot of our social workers, who maybe the school buildings are closed, but our schools are not closed right now. So we have a lot of social workers and counselors who are calling and connecting with families right now to work on some of these issues, because we know, and we'll talk about it over and over again, but an overload of adversities in the home is one of the key indicators of increasing rates of substance abuse, increasing rates of family violence, and other mental health issues. So one of the things that we want to do is we want to make sure that when we do reopen, that we are ready to provide responsive caregiving, not just in our schools, but we hope that this will also be true in our homes and our child care centers. We want to be advocating for more mental health services in our school, and we want to make sure that we look for a way to mitigate the impact of poverty. And I don't think anyone would disagree at this point that we know that we've got to expand access to health care, not just in overall in general, but certainly as it relates to this pandemic. The last thing that I want to share before Dr. Ruth starts talking about some of the issues that we want to deal with around classroom trauma-informed behaviors is we want to make sure that during this process that we don't fail to mention that social distancing, physical distancing is critical. We understand that, but it's also important that we stay connected to the people we care about, not just at home, but that we stay connected to our children and their parents, and we stay connected to our fellow educators as we go through all this. This is a critical part to our kids' healthy growth and a critical part to them being able to cope with COVID-19. So, we had some tips down here about various things that we can do, but I don't want to go into this too much because we'll pick up some of this during our presentation. But the big theme here, I think you are hearing, is that it's really important as we're developing this remote learning process that we have a way to interact with our students back and forth that's thoughtful and engaging, that we don't just develop relationships with our kids right now, but it's a great opportunity to develop some relationships with our parents, that we look for ways every day or at least once a week to allow our students to connect with each other and for parents to connect with each other. So we encourage you to be creative in trying to think about the social interconnectedness right now, not just the instruction for the day. And last, we'll say, and give yourself a break, be kind to yourself. We need a lot of ways to relieve our own stress if we're going to be a responsive, trauma-informed educator that can really work with children. So, take a couple deep breaths, and now we will dig in. I want to say one last thing as we prepare to start our presentation tonight, is that now we're going to switch over to our normal presentation that we like to do about building relationships with our students and within our schools. And it will, some of this now will seem so, oh yes, of course, common sense, especially when we talk about what we've been through with COVID-19. But we hope you'll glean something from our presentation tonight. And keep in mind that we're doing this live for the first time, and that we're going to act as if we were sitting with you in your school right now and presenting some of these notions. So Dr. Ruth, I'm going to let you take over and start our presentation tonight.
Hello, everyone. And again, it's a pleasure to be here with you. We're going to jump a little bit into and zoom into really trauma-informed steps that build relationships with students experiencing trauma. Now, the key word here is relationships. A lot of what Yvonne talked about leading into this, you see as a disruption of relationships, especially with COVID-19. She said stay connected to people you care about. And so one thing I want to sort of just highlight about sort of a COVID-19 response before we move into our traditional presentation is that social distancing, it should not mean social isolation. And so we want to make sure that children, especially younger children, need quality time with their caregivers and important people to them. So you want to make sure that you're socially connecting and that understanding that improves the child's chances of showing resilience in adversity. So again, staying connected in a season of isolation is really important. And what we like to say during this presentation is one caring adult makes the difference. And so even in a season of stay at home and isolation, that caring adult is still just as significant. So here, if you want to highlight any word that's on the screen at the moment, it would be relationship. And so if you Google or you research resilience, you'll find just a wealth of resources on our website. Also, just around the area of resilience and adversity and trauma. But what we do is we zoom into what does it mean to build a relationship between two individuals, the teacher and the student, the administrator and the student, and then parents and the student. And so what you will hear today is really a walkthrough some practical categories and tips on how to build and foster relationships with children. So this is how we are defining listening. Listening is the ability to understand what is being communicated verbally and non-verbally. This is how we are defining reassure. Reassure is the ability to transfer value to the perspective of vulnerable students. Validate, how we are defining that tonight, is the ability to acknowledge what is being communicated by students. Respond, how we're defining that, is the ability to communicate an explanation and not just send a statement. Repair is the ability to repair a relationship or mend a relationship and establish trust between staff, students, and improve peer-to-peer communication. And finally, resolve, the ability to come to terms with what happened and collaborate to prevent misunderstandings. So, we are talking through a lens where we are saying educating and educators and teachers should be aware of the signs of anxiety and stress and the ways in which they can adapt their classrooms to that environment of really building relationships that allow kids to respond to adversity. And so we are highlighting first, listen, this is the first key term. Now, just for your information, the research say that the first three categories, listen, reassure, and validate, are normally traits that are commonly practiced by teachers. These are traits that you would see in the classroom every day. The last three, respond, repair, and resolve, are normally the ones where research say teachers have to work a little harder at. So in this sort of presentation tonight, we normally try to make it engaging and interactive with work groups. So we're going to try to discuss and talk through some of the strategies virtually. Number one, listening. Listening may also include observing a silent signal from a student. This is not always the person who's the loudest in the classroom or the loudest student displaying the loudest behaviors or signs of trauma or adversity. Sometimes silence speaks louder than noise in this case. So when we say listen, we also are asking you to be observant of students who you see are shrinking or trying to become invisible in your classroom. That may be a sign that there are some underlying concerns and issues. There's a way in which you deal with a student who are showing more visible and louder sort of signs of attention, need for attention, versus the one who's more silent and the one who is trying to be invisible, how you deal with that individual student. So here are some ways in which you can engage in strategies around listen. Number one, you can do frequent check-ins for understanding. This could be a thumbs up or a visit to your office or a chair by your desk. That is not a punitive tool, but a student can come at any time and really display, have a conversation about their day or what has occurred last night. Also, active listening is a great tool that helps strengthen relationships. It can also reassure the students of their anxiety levels. But finally, just restate what the student is saying to be sure that you're hearing the right message. And so these are some ways in which a teacher can engage in listening. But what about administrators? Administrators can consider social workers and counselors and psychologists, their office location. How about placing these support staff in strategic locations in the school to where they can directly talk to and listen to students? But then finally, for the administrator, provide real-time communication tools for teachers who need to, report small, sort of challenges that students are experiencing, and really put emphasis on the voice of helping professionals in the school building. So that's the listening. Let's go on to our next one, reassure. Reassure, again, remember, we are defining reassure as the ability to transfer value to the perspective of the student. The ability to transfer value or to the perspective of the student. Again, this is an element that teachers are normally strong. And normally, if you walk into a classroom any day, you're more than likely going to experience this happening in one of your classrooms. So it's essential for teachers to establish a positive relationship with students. And that is not just based on their grades or their behavior. Consider talking with social workers, counselors, or peer teacher groups to discuss techniques for establishing positive relationships with various students. When I was a teacher, we realized very quickly that certain teachers have really strong relationships with certain students. And so we would get advice from each other on how to handle particular students. So we almost had a tag team structure where we allowed ourselves to really engage deeply in what works with certain students in certain ways and certain times. So here are some tips, additional tips. Words are not always required. Just silently, listening can help assure a student. Also, establish a way for you to capture and value student perspectives in a safe and non-threatening ways. Sometimes if you call a student out in the middle of a class, sometimes that's threatening to certain students. So figure out ways in which you can provide sort of reassuring platforms for building a strong relationship between you and the student. And then also, let your students know a little about yourself and your feelings too. Try to be transparent in the classroom. That makes you human in the eyes of your students in the classroom. And you're modeling what you're trying to coach out of your students. So now we can go into validate. So validate, remember how we're defining this. Validate is, really, providing value to the feelings and involving recognizing someone's feelings or acknowledging them as important. So really, really allowing students to realize that, they are important, what they're feeling is important, and the teacher who is leading the classroom honors their voice and their feelings. And so that is a key part, again, a strength of teachers normally when you enter a classroom. So in building a healthy teacher-student relationship, it's important to validate students' feelings when they're upset. Now, normally this is a difficult time. Normally you have to wait to de-escalate to engage in this strategy, but work with your helping professionals to develop, ways in which you can validate students, such as, various verbal responses, body language, or just asking clarifying questions to allow students to elaborate on their own feelings. But here are some tips that we can share with you. Number one, give verbal responses to show that you're listening. Like, I see, and nodding your head, and I'm here. Use body language to show that you're listening. I spent the majority of my career in alternative settings, and the students were experts at reading my body language. They could tell if I was validating their feelings and thoughts before I even said a word. So your body language is just as important as your active listening nods. But also, you want to talk less and listen more and validate. You want to make sure that you're hearing clearly what the student is saying. And for administrators, consider a mechanism that helps students identify one adult at their school, and make that a part of a larger school plan. And then last one, just do your part to create a culture throughout your classroom. If you create a culture that's transparent and that leads towards better relationships, then you have a chance of that student finding that one caring adult. Now we can move on to respond. For respond, again, we're defining respond as the ability to communicate an explanation without defending. What's really difficult in this narrative is usually the student is accustomed to hearing an adult voice and not allowing their own voice to be heard and understood and validated. And so now we're talking about a way in which the student can communicate an explanation from an adult who has heard and has reassured and has listened to the concerns and feelings of the student. The way teachers respond to students and their parents can impact how much a student is willing to be vulnerable and forthcoming with staff, and how parents are willing to work with school personnel. I can't tell you how many times I have engaged in a situation at a school where I have to first walk through the layers of distrust between the parent and the school, the layers of distrust between the student and the school, and that impacts how they respond to me and how I respond to them. So trauma-informed communication techniques must be modeled from the front office to be effective throughout the building. So this even, accounts for the attendance clerk when the front desk staff, when the student is coming in and they're late. How that person responds to tardy impacts that student's entire day. And so when we talk about respond, we're not just talking about inside the classroom, the hallway, PE, the bus driver. So this goes way beyond just the one-to-one teacher and student or administrator and student. So here are some ways in which you can think of ways of strategies to respond. Think about how you want to approach a parent-teacher conference, for example, and what strategies you can use to be trauma sensitive. Usually I've seen in environments where teacher-parent conferences where it seems like the parent is coming into a barrage of voices that are already embedded with narratives that their child is troubled or having problems, and they're not sensitive to the feelings and thoughts of this parent. So you want to make sure that you're sensitive to what the parent is walking into and what the student is walking into so that you can have appropriate responses in your communication. Recall similar experiences, for example, or normalize their reaction. I think most people in the situation would feel that this way or that way. And again, you're talking one-on-one to a student again. Last one in this particular response area is just empathize with the student. You really want to acknowledge their personal history. Many of them come with a story, and if in the absence of knowing that story, you can jump to some assumptions that may not be accurate for the situation. And so that's ways in which you can appropriately position yourself to respond in the correct way. Now we can move on to repair. Repair, and how we are defining this, the ability to really mend relationships and establish trust between teacher and students and improve peer-to-peer communication for our students is essential to having sort of a successful school environment. Now this is one area where research says teachers have a very difficult time. Again, when you talk about repair, then you must think through your own trauma and how you respond to trauma and how you are reflecting that in your ability to repair, respond, and apologize, and to understand the student's trauma. And so repair is one of the areas where we see in terms of listening to those who sit in this space academically, areas of improvement for the class. Developing strategies in your classroom that allow students to repair relationships with each other and with other school staff is key component to be a trauma-informed. Some of these programs can and could operate within the classroom. Some might operate school-wide or district-wide for that matter. And here are some of the strategies. Be transparent as a human being in your classroom. Model and explain to your students how to appropriately apologize and or ask for forgiveness from each other. Establish a restorative justice or program or strategy like that can really, work at all grade levels with various strategies. It can help students understand and take responsibility for their own behaviors and actions without, punishment that impact their grade and attendance. This could be in your classroom, or again, it could be school-wide. And so we want to move on to the last step that we want to highlight here, and that's resolve. How you resolve a situation centered around a traumatic event will dictate how this cycle occurs again when additional conflict and trauma occurs with that student and others who are observing. Resolve, and how we are defining it, is the ability to come to terms with what happened and collaborate to prevent future misunderstanding. It is helpful to develop best practices based on experiences and lessons you've learned in your school. Again, even if you're dealing with one student, other students and their peers are watching. So you want to make sure that you're managing and you're resolving conflicts so that you can improve the overall spectrum of all the students in the classroom and the school. It is amazing how good students can be at this point where they're trying to resolve conflict. Encourage students to talk early in a conflict and resist avoidance behaviors. What I found in alternative settings is the quicker we were able to resolve and get both parties into the room, the faster we were able to move on from that incident. The longer you allow for it to fester and to boil in these spaces, the more difficult it is to resolve these particular conflicts. So a tip for administrators and for teachers is, having a buddy system. Pair students with a peer to assist with cultivating ways students can work together to resolve conflict. And also ask your principal to work with your PTA, to have a parent education programs to help them understand really ACEs and resilience. And again, we host PTA resilience trainings. So have us come out to your school to really talk to your parents who are in the community. And then for administrators, hold frequent staff meetings so that everybody can understand social emotional learning tools, and so that your staff can understand resilience and the idea of being a trauma-informed learning environment. And finally, as administrators, elevate the voices of the support staff. You have psychologists, therapists, counselors, and regulating them to case managers rather than a team that can be preventative, address concerns, and help teachers find tools to build relationships. That team is critical to the school-based environment. And so with that, those are the areas in which we're highlighting. And through there, we believe and we're confident that that student can find that one caring adult to build and foster wonderful relationships when that student is experiencing trauma. And this is an overview of all 6 steps. This particular worksheet is on our website. And feel free to go on there and download this particular document. Again, you have listen, reassure, validate, 3 areas that we see often in the classroom. And then we have respond, resolve, and repair, 3 areas where we see there's room to improve in the classroom. So we're here giving trainings, trying to help teachers and educators and administrators think in this way. But let's go through this as a quick overview. Listening, find out your staff's knowledge about trauma-informed strategy, and then also help them understand the importance of listening. Reassure, create school culture that allows students to be listened to, even if the student's narrative may conflict with the staff narrative. Validate, promote student perspectives. Respond, restorative justice practices that help traumatized students. Resolve, reviewing best practices for resolving conflict, both at the school level, classroom level, and just one-to-one, peer-to-peer. And then finally, repair. Just recognizing that how you repair a trauma-informed incident will impact what happens to that relationship.
This is a good summary here of the previous slide. Dr. Ruth kind of summarized some great things that administrators, that the school leaders, department heads, vice principals can consider when and under these concepts of listen, reassure, validate, respond, understand, resolve, and repair. And this slide, it looks the same, but it's really focused on kind of a summary for teachers. One of the things that we always remind people over and over is about 2/3 of our kids will experience a potentially traumatic experience by the age of 16. And we're not even sure as adults or students or educators or parents what the long-term consequences are going to be for when school reopens this year and into the future years around the anxieties that have been created around the virus, and children worried about their families and worried about their health and literally worried about losing family members. So this is a very great summary here of how teachers are so critical in forming positive relationships with their students and promoting trauma-sensitive approaches. There is nothing probably more important to a child during a given day than the interaction they're having with their teacher when they're at school, and that interaction they're having with their fellow peer group in the classroom. And the teacher is so instrumental and so important in setting the tone for all of those things, because we really believe very strongly that how you approach things in your classroom with struggling students will allow all students, not just the struggling students, but all students learn how to build resilience and confidence. With the right support, all students can learn to negotiate and navigate adversity, whether it's bullying in their class, or it's shyness, if it's coming into the classroom from a home environment that was unsettled that day or that month, and how we can help our kids navigate these is very, very important. And so again, this kind of summarizes really quickly, and then we're going to open it up for questions, where Dr. Ruth had just gone through so beautifully. Was the relationships with students start with the act of listening and doing it without judgment. And that's really hard to do, right? Our body language often gives that away. But one of the things that I like to say here is that it's the first critical moment. You know, the time that you take to listen and know your students cannot be replaced. We've heard some wonderful stories on our travels across the school systems where teachers have figured out a way to set aside where each week they have 5 minutes, 6 minutes, 7 minutes with each individual student to check in, to have the eye contact, to show that they're actually listening. And then we've talked about the reassuring, that it's really important. And one of the things that we know, that when we watch great educators create trauma-informed, safe places in their classroom, is when students feel like they can talk to their teacher, when they can come up to the desk and share a concern and not feel that that's going to be, you know, send you back to your desk. So this reliable, warm love, that students feel safe. This may be the only place at school where they have this opportunity. And again, validate. One of the things that I always say to teachers is, can you make sure that somehow you have a way to validate the worth of a child that's not related to their behavior or their grades? Because sometimes the grades aren't going to be there, and sometimes the behavior control is not going to be there. So, so the interaction is just about grades and just about behavior, and it's never going to be an opportunity for you to let the student know you care. We already talked about responding, and you know, try to help your students in your classroom develop good peer-to-peer relationships. This is where restorative justice that Dr. Ruth mentioned is really kind of key. But giving kids a chance to explain to each other why they acted a certain way or how they felt about it can go a long way in building peer-to-peer relationships and saving you a lot of time in your classroom. So I think that I don't really need to go into too much about understand and resolve. I think that Dr. Ruth has already done that, but I would just end this slide by saying that one of the things that we know as parents, if we are parents or educators, administrators, is that a student's belief in fairness and integrity is key to everything that happens in that classroom, every interaction they have with you. Many of us can probably remember times in our personal lives or our own school life that we could say, well, I don't like Mr. Smith, but he was always fair. I didn't really like Mrs. Jones, but Mrs. Jones never said untruth about my performance. I did act badly. So we really think that as part of that trauma informed, that if you are seen by your students as fair to all the classes, you know, all the classmates, and integrity, that's really important. So we want to stop here, and we want to give people an opportunity. If you have some questions, we'd love for you to put it in the question box there under chat box. And Terrence, one of the things I saw already was that somebody said they missed a little bit under listen when you were going over listen. Could you go back, and you had given a couple examples under listen, and could you take a few minutes to do that?
Yes, not a problem. Go back to.
I remember that one of them was giving verbal cues, you know, making sure people saw, you know, I see and whatever. And I think you talked a lot about body language.
Yes, what's key with listening. Usually when we say listening, listen, we're normally trying to focus on the student that's making the most noise or the biggest display of behavior. And so we try to listen to those sort of actions, and we assume that that is the only need or trauma attached student behavior that we know. But what's key here with listen is sometimes it's silent. Sometimes it's a student that's shrinking. Sometimes it's a student that is quieter than normal or in the corner. And so with listen, if anything stands out, it's really the not just looking for the student that's making the biggest display of behavior, but those who are shrinking in the side of classroom. I teach at NC State, and most of the students are entering the university with a 4.0 or higher. And so we're not talking about a grades problem, but their anxiety and the anxiety that's attached and linked to trauma in their lives, and their ability to have tools to adjust to and deal with the trauma may impact their grade even at the university level. And these are students who are historically are the quieter ones, the one that's turning in their assignment. So we just wanted to highlight in the listening area that it may not always be the student with the low performing grades or the loudest noise. It may be the silent student that's turning in their grades.
One of the questions here is really a comment. Let me just respond to it from one of our guests tonight. And she's just validating that how important she thinks it is to make sure that you find time to validate and interact with your students. And she says that she starts every day with talking to her students and giving them an opportunity to tell what's going on. And she repeats back to them what they're saying. She said, make sure that they know she's listening. So you felt bad about that. So you didn't feel happy about that. So you're worried about that. And that's a great technique for validating feelings. And I always like to say at my age that a lot of this is common sense, right? In the sense that we know as adults, when someone validates our feelings, we know how it feels, right? You know, when Dr. Ruth says to me, good job, that makes me feel good. And when people say, I hear what you're saying, I understand your confusion, that's a validation, and it's really important. And I do know several people have said, well, there's not a lot of time for that, and that's true. And I'll tell you a small little story. It's from an elementary teacher who has what she calls the me chair. And it's a little chair that she sits by her desk, and she's an elementary school teacher. So, and she makes sure that every single child during the week has a chance to come and sit next to her in the me chair. And this is a time that their kids are doing their work or doing their homework or doing their reading. And when they come there, she just sits there quietly and talks to them, and they're allowed to tell her anything they want. Their favorite sports team, something that happened on the way to school, on the bus, something that happened at lunchtime, something that they want they want a bike. Whatever it is, she lets them talk. And what she says is that eventually over time, what she hears is more and more of information about their concerns, their worries, and their fears. And that gives her an opportunity to help them mitigate those in terms of learning. And sometimes it means that she's able to connect them to working with the counselor or working with the social worker or even chatting with the parents. So it's really important to do that. Also, Sarah, someone said down here, tell us a little bit more about restorative justice, especially in high school. Do you have any comments you want to throw out there about that?
Yes. My experience, again, it's in alternative settings, and usually in this settings, the center of our work is how do we help students resolve conflict and concerns within a school setting. And really, restorative justice is a tool that's used by school districts to really help students navigate conflict, disagreements, and to really think through decisions around really restoring and responding relationships with their peers and with the school itself. One thing I do like about restorative justice is it takes a student-driven process to really thinking through what does it mean to take responsibility for what you have done, to apologize for what you have done, and to think through next steps. And then also it's in place of really, just more punitive structure that punishes students for making bad decisions. It helps them think through those decisions and alternatives. Campbell University here in North Carolina, if you're here, has a program where they do a lot of training and work around that area. And then I've been in several schools in Wake County that have used this platform to really address some concerns and produce a different culture in their school.
And I would say that that I would, because we don't have enough time to talk about everything we'd like, but I will say about restorative justice is that if you look on our website under education justice, we have some really great resources and some really good books. There's one that's called the Little Handbook of Restorative Justice. I picked up a copy used on Amazon, and it was very inexpensive, paperback. It's a great little book that kind of explains what restorative justice is. But we have in North Carolina a lot of high schools, even in Wake County, where student councils have adopted a restorative justice process, where things that normally would lead the kid to in-school or out-of-school suspension, if the principal approves, they're referred to the restorative justice or the peer group for discussions, and the students work in a conversation together with the guidance counselor or a social worker leading them on ways that their reprimands could be made, that we could, apologies could be made, or a way to restore the relationship that could be made. And this can be done even in elementary school. So I think please go and look at some of these books, but it is a great staff development opportunity for administrators to have restorative justice as a goal for their school, for training for staff development, and we encourage that. Someone said, how about when you create a buddy system between staff and students, should the students decide who should be in their system? Should the students be able to pick this, or should they decide who they're comfortable with, Terrence, or should the teacher have some input? Your view.
So I had you realize during the school year over time what students have relationships with certain teachers, and it's almost like a spoken sort of norm within the the professional culture within sort of just the staff itself. What teacher has rapport with which student, and sometimes it's not a formal process, but usually we know what relationships are working for which students. But I would encourage, if you want to build relationships, I would encourage that the student voice is significant in that process. Sometimes the student will highlight people that you wouldn't expect. It could be the janitor, it could be the front desk person. So I would encourage highlighting the student voice because they should be secure and trust that relationship, and that relationship should precede any assignment from another adult, so it's not forced. But just in my opinion, I would argue that the student voice is significant in this election.
Okay, let me see here. I'm scrolling down just to make sure. I posted our website, Public Schools First, and Elizabeth is listed in here. She's been typing in some websites for you here and resources. Do you have advice on reassuring secondary students, especially K-9, that you understand their perspective but still have to keep the class rule? Sometimes my students push back on all class rules. Terrence, you had a lot of experience with kids who push back against rules. I wonder if you want to share some thoughts here.
Yes. What I found is normally if a student is pushing back, especially if they're pushing back in front of an audience, usually there's something behind that desire to challenge that rule, and it may not have anything to do with the rule itself. So I would take some time to build a relationship to understand the deeper purpose behind sort of that pushback. And what I found, it had sometimes to do with the absence of a father. Sometimes it had to do with circumstances at home where lights were turned off, or one kid, he was he refused to go to class, and we found out that his dad was just sent to prison. And so sometimes it's not even related to an incident in the school building. So it's normally a sign of I need attention rather than the rule itself that I've experienced in my setting.
And I would only add one thing to class rules. I think that you can say, we're going to, if the class rules can, as much as possible, allow students to help create some of them within the rules of the school, right? They can't say we're going to leave class early 10 minutes and it's a class rule. No, that's not a class rule. That's tyranny, and we can't do that. But I think that when I've seen in high school, that works really good. If the teacher says, okay, these are 3 rules that we cannot change. But let's all talk about some class rules that you all can agree on. Mutual respect, not talking when someone else is talking. I think if you can find an opportunity to let them have some input into some of the class rules, the pushback is not as great. But when it is, I think that you can say, okay, we're going to follow the classroom rules for this quarter. And at the end of the quarter, we may have a class day that we'll talk about switching them out and modifying them a little bit. I think what we know with high school students is that any opportunity you can to give them some control and in the conversation, it builds integrity and trust in you. Someone else said here that they work a lot to talk about character. That helps them listen. And someone says, is there a comprehensive basic literature based to point? Let's see. Basic to the point that you can recommend to distribute among colleagues. So there's 2 things I think you're saying, and Terrence, you help me out here, but if we're talking about the whole concept of resilience, trauma-informed learning, behavior, and so forth, yes. 2, we'll talk about that in a minute, but our website is loaded with really great articles to help you understand why trauma-informed instruction and strategies as parents or community leaders or doctors or teachers is really important. And we also recommend heavily a website at Harvard. I'll give you that link in a few minutes. If you're talking about the whole issue around restorative justice, yes, again, go look on our website. But Terrence has mentioned Campbell University, and the little book of restorative justice is just a great place to start because its appendix has a lot of other resources. And when we talk about some of the things that are going on with staff development, the last thing I don't want to forget about is talk to your social worker. Even if they only come once a week, see if you can get on the calendar. But, ask your leaders in your school, can we have social workers talk about this? Can we have a staff development that's geared toward looking for ways to deal with behavior and restorative justice? Can we have a staff development day on resilience and strategies for being trauma informed? So really push the school system to allow you to use your counselors and your social workers and your school psychologists to help you be better managers in your own classroom. Terrence, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, just one thing. When you look at our website alone, and then outside of that, there's just a wealth of information. You're going to see just information on trauma-informed community, trauma-informed schools, trauma-informed classroom, trauma-informed parents. We are only talking about the relationship between the teacher, the administrator, and the student. So we zoomed in very narrowly to particular focus. What I've learned is if I depend on my support staff that Yvonne was talking about during the summer, where I can invest in community, we would go and do house visits. We would talk to parents, sit on their couch and sofa. I've learned so much about the types of trauma that I need to focus on during the year. So you can be more specific about the type of trauma if you engage community when they're off during the summer, if you're in traditional counseling, where you're able to learn what trauma is being experienced in the community that surround your school. Then you can be more deliberate about the type of resources you want to connect to, because there's so much out there.
That's a great question here, and I really am glad you asked it. So can you talk a little bit about student trauma impacting teacher stress? One of the things that I say a lot when we do trainings in person is that one of the reasons that we're so engaged, Dr. Ruth and I, Public Schools First, NC, is so engaged in the issue around understanding ACEs, understanding adverse childhood experiences, is because we know that it not only impacts students, but it also impacts educators. We like to talk a lot about secondhand stress is being very much like secondhand smoke. And we think that a lot of our teachers, our educators are experiencing secondhand trauma. Some of it is because they have high empathy quotient. You know, that the one thing that makes great teachers is that they are often very empathetic and very able to interact with students at their level. And what that also means that produces a lot of emotions and feelings. We know that teachers hear a lot of stories from their students about the trauma that they're experiencing. So, and often students who are traumatized are the first ones who act out in class. Sometimes they're the ones who are the bullies in the class. Traumatized bullies are often traumatized children. I always talk about a lot how I was heading down the path of being a bully myself in middle school because I was tall and gangly and picked on, so I started bullying back. So, you know, traumatized children often are the bullies. So the teachers are absorbing all of this. And so it's very important for teachers to understand their own trauma and to have ways that they can also build resilience themselves. And so you never to, the impacts of trauma, which we talk about in the film and you see in the literature, they are lifelong. They're lifelong physical and they're lifelong emotionally. And some of us have the opportunities to develop resilience and overcome those adversities. And so teachers do need a way to cultivate resilience themselves and self-care and talking with peers and working, interacting. So it's a very, it's an important question, and I thank you very much for asking it. And I'll say one last thing. That's why we need social workers and counselors and school psychologists in our schools and nurses, because we need help in providing direct services to our kids. We need help in having our children and their families connected to community services. And we need help as educators understanding these issues and knowing how to manage our classrooms and deal with our students. That reduces the trauma that teachers feel. It says here, I'd love for our teachers to be able to see the video about resilience. How is that possible? Well, we've had a lot of screenings of resilience. And right now we're in a situation where we can't go out into the community and show the film. But if a school system, if a school has an ability to get their entire school engaged in having this as a workshop, we would be willing to work with you on seeing if we could create a virtual screening just for your school. We can't do it in a big way because we don't have a platform to do that, nor do we have authority to do that with our copyright. So, you know, email us, and if we could work that out with you, we'd be happy to. Let's see. I want to make sure that I've got to go more quickly and see if I can answer a few more questions. Teresa, let's see. It says here, what suggestions do you have about talking to students who are really freaked out over school not going back to normal next year? Students are terrified. So I think that that's another thing I want to tell you is that in a lot of the materials that we have been posting on our website under COVID-19 resilience page, and there's a special section now called COVID-19. And there's a lot of things there about talking to kids about their anxieties and talking to kids about their fears. The biggest thing I can tell you is that we have to depend on and maybe demand that our school systems prepare us for this. So this is something that every individual teacher is going to have to count on that the leaders in that school are going to have the resources there ready to help you answer and deal with some of these questions. So I can't, without more, as I don't think we can say much more than that. The next question I see is, what are some ideas for to be better aware of my weaknesses? How do you deal with resistance? Okay, that's a really hard question to answer in this kind of a setting. But I do think that if the more you can educate yourself and the more you can advocate for yourself with your school administrator and leaders in your school, the better. And, you know, trust your instincts as an educator, and prepare yourself, and keep looking to the research to prove, you know, your points. Someone said, I'm in my second year of teaching, and I've learned positive relationships with students are everything. Thank you for saying that. Good job. I have someone else that said it's important to let children to know and to make sure that they feel wanted. They are not enough. Amen. Thank you for adding that. You mentioned holding a parent education class. It's honestly a good idea in our schools. I've worked all Title I parent involvement, and there. Do you have any tips for parents to improve parent involvement? Well, you know, that's another workshop for another night, and it's getting later. But yes, in general, it is critical for parents to be involved. And we have learned that when we talk to PTAs about being trauma informed, that there are just a lot of barriers for parents in terms of parent involvement. And, you know, I had a very wise professor one time in education. He said to me, you know, the parent who gets the kid fed, hugged, and their homework's done, that's parent involvement. So sometimes parents aren't going to show up at school, or can't show up at school because of work, because of personal fears, because of lack of transportation, lots of ways. But a lot of parents are much more involved than you think. Parents, you know, and I think we should be very careful not to criticize parents if they can't show up at school or join PTA or volunteer in the classroom. There's a lot of ways that we can help parents be involved through our communication with them and so forth. There's a question here. Let's see. We use alternative school and elements. Someone says here, Terrence, is there anything else we can do to help students provide meals and groceries, continue with academics and these kind of things? I will tell you that let's move on now. Someone said, I want to talk about that, but let's move to that slide actually, because I think we're getting to the point where we may be running out of time. But let's hold that question for a minute to the end. But someone says here, Terrence, restorative justice is not just a pass through, right? And I think what they're saying is this is not a get out of jail free card. That restorative justice is hard work.
Mm-hmm.
And someone says, could encouraging students to write regarding their feelings, emotions, thoughts be responded to by a teacher considered a strategy? Well, parents, you might want to talk about that, but I think that a lot of teachers who are giving writing assignments often have what we call free writing, where students are allowed to talk about something or write about something that's important to them, or something that was the happiest time in their life, or you know, something that they're concerned about. I think that's a great strategy myself, because you know, sometimes we are so driven that was like, read this play, write about it, read this book, write about it. Sometimes I think having free writing is a great strategy. Terrence, what do you think?
I agree in terms of the journaling part of it, but also if there's a journaling and sort of follow-up video discussion with somebody that they've done about what they're experiencing and understanding at the moment, sort of an interaction, you know, sort of write down, you know, those sort of deep feelings and then talk it through with somebody else. But no, I think you're right.
And I'm trying, someone asked again, what was the name of the book? It's a little handbook of restorative justice. But if you go to our website, I hate to keep saying that, but that's where, I can't remember all these things. But I really, I'm going to keep telling you to go back there. And look, there's a kindergarten teacher, and she says she's implemented restorative justice practices, and she's seen significant improvement in relationships between students in her classroom. She's working to get this implemented school-wide. Oh my gosh, this is wonderful. I'd love for you to write an article for our newsletter. We put a newsletter out every week. I'd love for a teacher to write an article, less than 800 words if you could, but I'd love to publish something where you would describe what you're doing and how it's working. That would be fabulous, truly fabulous, because the authentic voices and a lot of the things that we're talking about tonight are you guys. Terrence and I are leading a discussion, but the real experts about what's going on in the classroom are educators. And if you have great positive examples of stuff that we could do, we would really love to publish your and one of the things that someone said here is, how can I build positive relationships with parents as a teacher? Dr. Ruth, I'm going to let you talk about that.
Yeah.
You've been a teacher and you've been a principal.
Yeah, the part that's been beneficial for me is being deliberate and intentional about wanting to create relationships with parents who don't have a lifestyle that fit opportunities for meetings or opportunities for engagement, or parents who've had traumatic experiences as students, and so they feel hesitant about the school building and the school structure. So being deliberate about the times of meetings, where you meet, topics that you're meeting about, not always around discipline or disruption in the classroom, but just a check-in to see how the parent is doing. Some of these build social capital throughout the year, so when you have to have deep conversation around trauma, you have something to pull from. But for me, the moment in which parents are most receptive to engage in relationships is when there's positive feedback about either the school, classroom, school, or community environment. Starting a relationship when you're discussing trauma is usually hard to sort of start and engage in a relationship through that strategy. But again, my work started in the summer. We would go to parents' houses and just say, hello, glad your child is coming to my school. Can't wait. And I had support staff with me. So I had support staff, social workers, counselors, psychologists, they were with me. But that's where I built my social capital with the students, so that I can have meaningful relationships throughout the year.
Terrence, I don't know if we've only got about 15 minutes late, but I wanted to try this question and see what you can do with it. Teachers asking, can you give an elementary school example of going through these 6 steps or 7 steps to deal with an aggressive student? And you've had that, can you give an example of how you would start with that child in terms of listening, reassuring? Could you do that in 3 minutes?
Yeah.
Or take a shot at talking about it in general. How do you deal with aggressive students?
Yeah, so I had a student who was a runner, and this student would run and leave class. And so we had to think out the box around these 6 steps, 7 steps to really understand sort of the deeper levels. And so listening to that student was going for a walk. Reassuring with that student was really trying to get the underlying issues around why are you wanting to leave this space? What will be a safe space for you? What we realized is that student was trying to get to the classroom that they were in last year. We were in the middle school setting. They were trying to run to their elementary teacher's classroom that was next door. And they felt safe in that one classroom. And we found that by going through these steps. And we were able to reduce the amount of times that student ran out of class. But again, if we would have just tried to minimize the running out of class, we'd have missed the purpose of that person towards the exit. And we were able to walk through these steps and really
Someone asked the question, this is a really important question, and they said they have seen the film Resilience and they want to know if how adults are given the ACEs survey. They saw how that was given in the film and how eye-opening it was for a lot of folks. And Terrence and I understand that. I am a 7 and Terrence is an 8. And you, just like in the film, one of the reasons we're attracted to probably this kind of work and these kind of topics is because of our own background of a traumatized background and the things that we went through as children and things that we were able to learn as adults in terms of dealing with our own trauma and our own resilience. We see ourselves as poster children, so to speak, as poster childs for how, you know, one caring adult, that caring grandmother or that caring mother or that caring auntie or that caring teacher or bus driver made a difference in all of our lives, and how it taught us to be successful and be resilient, having that person who trusted us. So we do believe in that. That survey is a great conversation point. You asked, does it violate the law or political correctness to have other teachers and students take it? What we do when we give it to adults is we pass it out and encourage them to look over it and count their yeses to give them a frame of reference for the film, but we do not collect that data. We don't pick up their questionnaires. We don't ask them to report unless they want to. So I think it can be a very useful tool if you had guidance in a staff development process to do that. In terms of students, I would not give this survey, this questionnaire out to students. I think that you would have to certainly have approval of their parents, but I don't think that in high school settings that they are ready to really absorb this information and have outlets to deal with it if they did. And I think it is kind of violating their rights. And as minors, you should not do that without parent consent. But I do think that that social workers have workshops and trainings and conversations that they do with students where these issues can be dealt with in a better way. So that's, Terrence, do you agree with me on that, or you have something you want to add?
No, I completely agree. We do the same particular training face to face. We found that there were teachers who were still grappling with trauma that they've experienced as a child, and so to sort of force kids in high school, middle school to really try to address the trauma that they're currently going through, I would encourage parents to listen, because it would probably be a larger conversation at home as well.
Okay, and I'm trying to go down here quickly, so as we are running out of time, and I want to see if I grab any more questions here. She said that she works in a school where there's a school-wide restorative model as a first-year teacher. I chose this as very difficult, and she thinks that it's really I can say that giving student voices and recognizing them makes amazing changes. My students are handling the pandemic in such a amazing way. I know that comes from the fact that we already had adults that care and working with them and supporting them. And how do you deal with other adults, especially experienced teachers, who break the trust that's been building? What is a good way to balance respect while standing your ground? Wow. I don't know. I would say this. I think that with everything in life, being informed, using data, using information you find, and continue a conversation. Just as we're talking to you about having conversations with your students, you have to continue to have conversations with the helpers in your school, with the department heads, with the social workers, with the counselors and your principal, and look for ways that you can keep pushing your view on a way that we approach children. But I don't know much more I can say on that, but I will say that one of the key things that we say when we do a presentation on resilience is that we think where all this starts is having enough helping professionals in our schools. Social workers and nurses and guidance counselors and school psychologists are trained to deal with these issues around children, their families, and educators. We have got to really work hard when our schools reopen to demand these services in our school system, because that is really the key to giving teachers and educators the help they need in their classrooms and to giving our students the help they need to succeed. So some of these questions are supporting that concept, and I really appreciate it. And I have someone here who says that she's a high school social worker and that this was enlightening. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. And really and truly, the film Resilience is critical for, if you haven't seen it, it's really an important film. Broken Places, a very important film. And I think educating yourself, the most any of us can do, right, at the end of the day, is we can't run the schools. Or maybe some of you on the line are running the schools. I hope you're listening. But for most of us as parents, as educators, as community activists, as education activists, we have to just focus on our kids, our classroom, our school, and making it the best we can, our homes, our PTA. And so do that and you'll be happy. Someone also said, please don't forget the paper tigers. Yes, we also own paper tigers. We love to show paper tigers. It's a little bit longer than we normally have, but we will say, we also show that film. We highly recommend it. One of the things that is really important is to leave tonight is to really, we cannot underestimate the importance of a caring relationship between a teacher and a student. If you learn or feel nothing else from this, I'm telling you that teachers saved my life. Teachers saved my life in the 8th grade, kept me in school, got me back on track. In high school, when I was a junior, a teacher saved my life. A teacher got me on track to go to college. I didn't have any clue how to get to college. So that one caring adult, so Terrence and I like to leave everybody with the challenge of be the one, hashtag be the one, we like to say, be the one caring adult, because we've learned and almost over and over and over again that one strong caring adult, a coach, a bus driver, a school secretary, a pastor, a parent, is really important. No matter what was going on in my household, my mother said I was important, I was valuable, I was smart, I was pretty. No matter what domestic violence she was experiencing, she did not let that, she was my one caring adult, right? So that's really important. For many kids, the only place they're going to get that is at school. We would like for all parents to be that resource, but they can't be sometimes for all kinds of reasons: poverty, racism, mental health issues, substance abuse issues. So when kids come to school, it's critical that we are that one caring adult. So we're going to have to finish up here because I don't want to disrespect your times, but all the stuff that's been going on right now with COVID and everything else, will we get through this? Yes, we're going to get through this. And one of the things that we know is that we have challenges. How we work together right now to protect our children and their families is key. How we reopen school, critical. And learning from the challenges that we're doing now and not making these mistakes in the future, very critical. So we want you to please stay safe, stay connected, and be trauma informed. And these are two things I promised you earlier I would share with you. One is the Center on Developing Child at Harvard University. They have a wealth of material on developingchild.harvard.ed. I couldn't list it all here, but there's tons of really great resources for parents, for educators, for social workers, psychologists. It's one of my favorite sites. Some of the people in the film work there, but I think you'll find others. And then, of course, our website, Public Schools First, Know the Issues, Resilience. That's another place that you can find information. And then I skipped a thing. Somebody asked about resources. A really quick thing I can tell you is that if you don't know how to get resources for families and students, call 211. It's a resource that will help you find out a lot of information And I forgot to mention that, so I wanted to go back and catch that number. The last thing is we are getting ready to start a series for every Thursday in May about, we've created our own little hashtag here of when public schools reopen, and we want to make them stronger and better prepared to deal with our children and support our teachers. So we want you to join us in this and some statewide education leaders and advocates to discuss. It's going to be from 8 to 9:30, a little bit later, to let people, get through the wonderful extra daylight we have right now. But if you will keep a lookout, you have to go to our Facebook page and you can register for any of these conversations where we're going to be talking about when schools reopen, what do we want for our kids? What do we want for our educators? And some of the things we're talking about tonight will be a part of that. So you know the drill. As we leave you tonight, we want you to stay connected with us. Go to our Facebook page. It's really important for us to have a lot of folks like us on Facebook, because that's how we convince people to keep us going. If we can show that we've got people on our newsletters and our Facebook page and on Twitter, that helps us keep our work going. So please do that. As well as it's where we post all of our events. It's the fastest, easiest way to find events that are coming up. And we would like to, if there's anybody if there's a burning question, Elizabeth, our social media director, is on tonight with us. Is there any question that I overlooked that you think is important that we try to jump on here at the very end? I don't want anyone to feel you've been so fabulous to be on with us tonight. Elizabeth, anything that you think's burning that you need to add?
I think a lot of people are just asking for some of the resources we mentioned, and those will be included in the follow-up email that you'll get tomorrow.
Okay, and one last thing I'll say is subscribe to our YouTube channel. We don't have this on here, but we'll add it in the future, because we have been recording all of our webinars, and there have been some fabulous ones. We had a great webinar with two professors from NC State about broken places, and they talked about a lot of these issues, and they talked about working to improve kids' executive functioning, which is also a great thing. When you go on the Harvard website, search for, under the developing child, search for executive functioning, because that talks a lot about how you help kids learn how to make good decisions and so forth. So Terrence, I'll let you have the last word tonight. And I think that in closing, some things that you might like to share as a parent, as a teacher, as a professor, as a principal. You have so many roles that you've played, and it's giving you some good things. Anything about classrooms and trauma informed that you would like to say as we close?
I would say that it's the big R, relationships, and you're creating them and you're fostering them even from a distance as you sit home. And so remember that relationships is what helps adults and children get through trauma, and COVID-19 is a traumatic event. And so your relationship you're building with your students and with your own children and peers is critical for this moment. So thank you for being on. Thank you for caring about resilience and building it in your school. And thank you for being an educator.
And I think that's it, right, Terrence? Thanks for saying that, because really the fact that you're on tonight and with us, hundreds of you, shows that you're already interested in what's going on with your kids and your students in your classroom. That's really key. And to end with some of those wonderful comments you made. I mean, always decide what you want to have happen in your classroom and work to make that happen. These kids are yours for the year, and your tone and your support is critical. And don't give up on talking to your administrators about staff development needs and programs at your school. There's a lot that can be done, and you might be the one that starts, revolutionizes the way your school approaches dealing with kids. We thank you so much for your time that you've invested with us tonight. Thank you and good night. and join us in the future for other webinars, I hope. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, Terrence.
Good night.